This morning, celebrating the empowerment of women at the beginning of Women's History Month, while UN Women for Peace advance their commitment to a more gender-balanced world. Plus,
he is a racist, he is a con man, and he is a cheat.
Michael Cohen's bombshell testimony. Does it pose a threat to President Trump? We'll hear from our political analysts.
Now, from 42nd and 2nd, this is Pix 11 News Close-Up with Marvin Scott.
Good morning, everyone. There have been remarkable advances for women's rights in the nearly 100 years since the Constitution gave them the right to vote. They have been woven into the American fabric, and their contributions, well, they've added to America's greatness. Yet, despite all their achievements, women still face an economic gender bias, and they're the frequent targets of violent crimes. The United States, surprisingly, ranks 10th in a survey of the worst countries for women. With more than 3 billion women in the world, many still face legal discrimination in no less than 155 countries. Now, those disturbing facts are highlighted at a time women are being celebrated. March is Women's History Month. This week, International Women's Day will be observed, and this past Friday, the UN Women for Peace Association gathered at the World Body for its annual awards luncheon, and also to bring awareness to the plight of millions of women in far-off corners of the world. I'm pleased to have with us members of the UN Women's Peace Association, the association's president, Barbara Winston, also board member Valbona Neritani. Thank you so much for coming in, and congratulations on all that you do. Let's talk about, we talk about celebrating women this week and this month, but yet in so many parts of the world they continue to feel the lash of violence, repression, isolation, discrimination. Why is there such a pandemic of this negativity towards women around the world?
Well, I think that society has evolved, and part of the cultural relationships between men and women have been established in many parts of the world. Mankind is over 100,000 years old, the human anatomical person, and yet civilization has continued to work on this path where you have this dichotomy between women's rights and the rights of men and human rights. I think this last 20 years has made a tremendous difference in putting the situation in its right context. We've had tremendous technological advances, scientific advances, and now I think is the time for women to really take their voice, make it loud and clear. And organizations such as ours are one of the great engines to do such a thing.
Well, the voice is being heard, particularly here in the United
absolutely.
States, the Me Too movement, but in different parts of the world. Well, Bona, India, I see, is on the list of #1 for worst treatment of women. A woman gets raped there every 29 minutes, and they get raped, but they can't protest it. It's incredible, this day and age.
That's correct, but this organization started in 2008 as part of the wife of the ambassador to United Nations. So even if the ambassadors and the Secretary General had put this on their agenda, also the spouse behind their agenda, they support them as well too. So this is what we do as spouse. We raise awareness and put pressure more in government to come up with law and respect women's rights, empower them, and being part of
empower them, yet there are these atrocities towards women. I read in Somalia alone, 95% of girls face genital mutilation between the ages of 4 and 11. Now, you deal with the United Nations, you deal with those ambassadors from those countries, and how can this exist in this day and age?
Well, actually, we need the private sector, we need the public, we need the community of people that are out there that are not particularly part of the government and raising their voices. And now I think that they have the opportunity. We have a new technology that makes everybody able to pronounce their voice, to lend an ear to these problems, and to promote and make governments react.
So let me ask you, the UN Women for Peace Association was founded back in 2008. Specifically, what do you do?
Well, Our founder was Muna Rihani al-Nasser. She's our chair and our founder.
The wife of the Secretary General.
Well, he was
right.
actually the ambassador of Qatar, and then Mr. Nasser al-Nasser. And then he was the High Representative for the Alliance of Civilizations, and also served as term
what does your
as
organization
president. The fact that we were able to actually create more awareness is a situation that people don't give enough credit to. The voices being heard is tremendous. Silence is the friend of the tormentor. The lack of voices and the lack of people not hearing what's going on. I mean, the information that you've cited here are things I'm sure that people have never heard of.
I didn't.
You yourself were astonished at these numbers. By our organization having its position, by our ability to reach out to the community of the world, actually, makes these problems more identifiable and more approachable and more able to find the system that can correct all these inadequacies.
So how does your organization make a difference?
Well, like we said, I'm just going to give a little bit more history of this organization. We started as spouse of the UN ambassador at that time, and the
question is, how do you make a difference?
Well, we create events. We raise money by bringing that awareness of women's issue. We give the money to UN Trust Fund to end violence against women, and those money are separated. It depends on the causes that are more important, and UN Trust Fund makes that decision where the money goes. But again, to answer your question, we raise money, but we raise awareness as well too, for gender equality and mostly to end violence against women. Now, since the beginning, we had our Secretary General that, we were surprised. His patron was Mrs. Ban at that time, Ban Suntek, and they were being a great supporter, and actually they have been, in a day like this, march in the snow and really, raise that awareness with us. Right.
I want to talk about, because you had a special luncheon and you had awards, and
yes.
Ben
we have
Stiller
some great
was one of,
awardees.
We're going to take a break. Let's pick up on that when we come back.
Absolutely.
Stay with us as Pix 11 News Close-Up continues. We'll be right back. We're talking about the plight of women in the month of Women's History Month. And we're talking in particular about the UN Women for Peace Association. And with that organization's president, we're with Barbara Winston and Valbona Neritani. And we were talking about a luncheon you have right after this taping of this broadcast. It'll be Friday when this is aired. And that helps to create the awareness you're talking about. Ben Stiller was one of the honorees, right?
Huge asset to us, because he's done so much philanthropic work besides his professional work. He has become a very, very important person when it comes to the crises approaching society and women in particular. He has been a great ambassador for peace, actually. And he is being introduced today by Sheikha Rima al-Sabah, whose husband is the ambassador of Kuwait. And she also is a representative for the refugees.
And we're talking about the treatment and creating an awareness about the discriminatory legal actions against women in different parts of the world. What about in the Middle East, in the Muslim world? That is slowly changing. I mean, women, for example, in Saudi Arabia, they can now drive cars. They couldn't do it for a while. But they're not allowed to have passports, if I understand correctly. They can't travel.
There are big issues, absolutely. And we're dealing with cultural issues, and it's very difficult to go and mandate cultural differences. But the fact that the eyes and the eyeballs of the world are looking at these specific particular parts of their culture is making people look at themselves. There is a reflection now. Also, we have world bodies, we have the community of nations looking at all of these issues, especially being at the forefront of these 2030 sustainable goals for the United Nations and for the world. The women's issues and violence against women are one of the key aspects
There's so much prevalence of violence against women. I'm reading some of these facts which are really astounding. In Pakistan, women are gang raped for men's crimes, religious extremism, targets women. There's no law against domestic violence. In Afghanistan, if I'm reading correctly, the rape victim can be forced by law to marry the attacker. How can this be allowed to go on? The United Nations is out there trying to bring peace and ameliorate things like this. And how can
well,
this
that's
exist?
why our organization is so important, because we have stood forward. We are face forward, and we are interacting with many other organizations and NGOs and foundations and corporations to try to bring the eyes of the world on these situations and make corrections. And I think that we will make tremendous efforts. We have some great, great, great ambassadors for peace. We have Ambassador Ronald Lauder, and as I mentioned, Sheikh Rima Al-Sabah, and others that are really devoting their lives and their attention to this philanthropic effort to change the dynamic. We need a massively transformative change of purpose. And a massively transformative change of purpose. And we will accomplish that because our voices are being heard, and we are really amplifying it by virtue of having our luncheon, by virtue of getting together. We're also working now with the Yale University Center for Emotional Intelligence, which will bring social emotional intelligence into the curriculum. What we have to do is deconstruct the DNA of violence, and that's what our mission is today. And that will resonate throughout the world. And we really feel that by bringing these wonderful people that we're honoring during this luncheon at this time, we have Ben Stiller, we have Leslie Udman that did India's Daughter, which was acclaimed throughout the world.
So the DNA of violence. But let's talk about the other thing, which is also a big problem. We're talking about violence against women all around the world. But what about the problem of human trafficking? What is being done by the UN, and how can your organization have input in here?
Well, the human trafficking is a tremendous problem, as you have stated. There are at least 40 million people that are being trafficked, 5 million annually. Many of them are girls and women. One of the people that the two people that we are honoring today specifically about trafficking is Deidre and Albert Pujols, the very, very famous baseball player. And they have a foundation to stop trafficking. And it really, it is on the agenda of our police enforcement that we have to stop this cruel, impossible situation that the whole world is suffering through. We have human trafficking in the United States.
You're trying to raise awareness, but also education is so important.
Yes.
The figure I read is that there are like 100 million who are not in schools.
Yes, that don't even have any
the majority of them are girls.
Yes, they don't even have primary education. This is a tremendous, tremendous problem. We have to try to make correction, which is why I said that we are, the things, we have educators that we are working with, as I mentioned, the Yale University Center for Emotional Intelligence. We are trying to gear up different schools. We started a school in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon for Syrian refugee girls to give them some kind of fundamental education. We are working tirelessly to try to organize with different groups. I think that is our really big asset, is that we are able to reach out.
So you are the voice for the voiceless.
Yes, we're one of the voices for the voiceless.
Let me ask you a quick question. Let's shift gears for a moment, because we are honoring women this month. International Women's Day comes next week on the 8th, I believe. We have a History Month and what you're doing over the UN. Talk about the accomplishments very briefly about women in this country over the past, since we had the 19th Amendment.
Well, I'm going to start with the UN. I see a huge change. Before, we didn't have too many female ambassadors. So now there are like 64 from 193.
So that's been a change at the UN as well as we have it on the United States Congress.
That's true.
We have more women.
We do believe that, women slowly, they're getting their voice heard.
Change is happening, but it's going very slowly in different
We're
parts
making
of
an
the
impact,
world.
though, making an impact. I mean, we have tremendous barriers because of cultural and institutionalized
Barbara, the UN Women for Peace Association, congratulations on all your efforts.
Thank you.
President Barbara Winston and Valbona Naratani, thanks so much for joining us. And I know you're going to your luncheon now.
And
Enjoy.
thank you.
For having
Thank you so
us.
much for having us.
Thank you. We're going to take a break. When we'll be back, we'll hear about from our political analysts what they have to say about Michael Cohen's explosive revelations, that is, before Congress. We'll be right back.
You were great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Many of us were riveted to our television sets or our radios this past Wednesday as President Trump's former fixer and personal attorney, Michael Cohen, delivered blistering testimony against President Trump, calling him a con man, a cheat, and a racist. Was Cohen credible? And did he say anything that could threaten the president? Well, let's fire that question to political strategist Hank Scheinkoff and political consultant Chapin Fay with the Mercury Group. Gentlemen, thanks for coming in. So what's your evaluation of Cohen's testimony, his performance?
Very credible, very well written almost like a dramatist would write a play. It had everything in it. I'm not a lawyer, but what you do, the conclusion you could draw after that testimony is that once Donald Trump is out of the White House, the U.S. Attorney, well, the FBI would be waiting for him to take him before the U.S. Attorney's office before the magistrate in New York City for arraignment.
Did he say anything that will threaten the president? Will this lead to criminal charges?
I don't think he said anything that we didn't already know. I mean, it was done to such dramatic effect, and it was clearly compelling in this reality TV age we're living in. But I don't know if he broke any new news, you know. And it's actually, with Michael Cohen, I think, is a unique one in this Trump era, where, you know, one side of the political aisle loves the guy for, you know, half a year, and then the next half of the year it's completely flipped, and now he's a liar. So it's hard to keep track with whether he was a liar on the campaign trail or he's a liar now, you know, or, you know, when he's telling the truth. So getting to the truth with Michael Cohen, I think, is a little bit more difficult than some of the other dramatists, as, you know, Hank put it this cycle. But I don't know that it endangers the president any more than any other thing that's going on.
Well, what did you feel was the most damaging thing he brought out?
The insurance and bank fraudulence that he charged, that the listing of assets and the
that he inflated his assets for insurance and deflated them for taxes.
Correct. That's very, very serious, and those are clear violations. You don't have to be Clarence Darrow to figure this one out. You know, clear violations of the law. But, you know, New York is a cops and robbers town. We have, what, 50,000 police of some kind, federal, state, and local, running around. What do you think they're going to do all day long? This Michael Cohen's testimony is a long-term project for law enforcement employment. If there's any, and they're going to be looking at everything the president ever did in his life.
I agree, and I would just say this is also, I mean, this is part of, to keep with Hank's metaphor, this is all part of the play leading up to impeachment, right? This was sort of the first act for Democrats. You know, they got to soften the ground. I think the ultimate goal, no question, is they want to impeach this president. They've wanted to since he's, you know, announced his campaign years ago. And I think this is just one more laying of the groundwork for that, because they're not quite there yet politically to be able to do that.
How damaging was his evidence or his testimony about the hush money to Stormy Daniels and producing those 2 checks that he said were reimbursement to him?
Listen, I think that's no question. There's a problem there for the president. I don't know that Michael Cohen made it any worse. You know, these are all things that we know. These are things that he said. I mean, this is stuff that has already leaked out or been, you know, mentioned in the public.
Isn't that in itself a criminal action of campaign funding violations?
It's very unclear. It's a very gray area in campaign finance. If what Michael Cohen is saying is 100% truth, step by step, you know, it could very well be a crime with serious ramifications. But, you know, we already have a test case. Senator Edwards, you know, did something similar, and he wasn't convicted of the crime. So if it's, you know, if the facts of the case are the same, then there is no crime there. But so we still don't know.
Michael Cohen also stepped on the president's headlines. He wanted to get something for optical purposes out of Korea. He got nothing out of Korea, but Michael Cohen became the news, not what he did with Kim Jong-un. That's not good news for the president. What it means is that the hijinks are less important than the criminal or other things that have much more kind of public view and interest by people in government.
Now, all of this precedes what we're anticipating the report coming from the special Mueller. That's going to come out about the Russia investigation. And also, Cohen talked about that meeting in June of 2016 at Trump Tower with Russian operatives who had dirt on Hillary Clinton.
Not good news for the president, no matter what, Michael Cohen, believe, not believe, but what happened is the majority in that chamber at that committee meeting did believe him, did ask the right questions, and did give enough information in those questions for prosecutors and investigators to be able to look at very seriously.
The other revelations that came out, he repeatedly asked, but talked about the Trump Tower during it, and that he said, and I think this is something we've heard before, that he kept active because he didn't believe he was going to win the election. And about the Trump Tower project in Moscow. He also talked about threatening Fordham University about releasing his grades. Did all of this surprise you or not?
I mean, none of it surprised me. I mean, I think there are things that are, what he said, are provable. You have the ability to prove this, and we'll find out if the special counsel does have the proof to be able to prove it. Some of these things, like the grades, I mean, we're never going to know about that, and that's sort of a distraction. And I think, to echo what Hank said earlier, the big problem is that Michael Cohen is not only sucking up all of Donald Trump's headlines, but it's bad for the country, right? I mean, infrastructure is not getting done. The House isn't passing legislation that, Washington, D.C. has shut down and led the country to do the same thing, to riveted to their screens. Nothing is happening. There's no legislating. There's no major pieces of legislation being debated. We're watching Michael Cohen, talk about Donald Trump.
Do you expect that the Democrats are going to call for impeachment proceedings in the House?
Long time to go. But going back to saying, you see, Michael Cohen and whoever wrote that speech, whoever was involved with him in that testimony, there are lots of people, as Chapin noted before we get on the air. It's really extraordinary because it's not about impeachment. It's about setting the stage for ultimately the removal of Donald Trump one way or the other. Either he's going to be defeated at the polls or he's going to be impeached. Why? Because it's just not working out well. The whole act is ending, and I think Michael Cohen is the first step. The Mueller report, whatever's in there is going to be in there. It'll be work for FBI agents for a long time to come. That's the difference here. This is going to go on for a long time.
We hear about the talk about impeachment, but impeachment is only like an indictment, but it has to go through the Senate, and with the Republican-controlled Senate, it's never going to happen, correct?
Well, much like in the last impeachment proceedings, it's all about the popularity of the guy that's being impeached, right? If these senators feel comfortable enough to vote for impeachment, which I don't think at this point we're there, then that's how that's going to play out.
It's about the good of the country, ultimately. Howard Baker, at the impeachment hearings in 1974, right, said, look, in the Senate Investigation Committee, said, look, what did the president know and when did he know it? Michael Cohen thought he was going to be John Dean, who was Richard Nixon's counsel, and come across as the cleanest of them all, as a man bearing his soul because of what had occurred that was wrong. What happened instead is that Michael Cohen did bear his soul, but he became implicated in what was wrong as well. This is so disgusting, and so, whether you like the president or not, Republican or Democrat, this whole thing is so disgusting by definition that it's hard to pay attention to.
The Republicans, of course, try to discredit him by saying, how could you believe a man who's been convicted of lying to Congress previously? But he did come across, what do you say, did he come across as credible, or do you not believe him?
I mean, it depends on where you sit. I mean, he was compelling for sure, and it was good theater. I don't know if he came across as credible. I mean, this is a man who Democrats spent over a year saying you couldn't believe a word the man said. Now he's been convicted of a crime for lying, and now all of a sudden he's the most credible person on the planet. It's just not Bible.
Okay, as you said earlier, this distracted from what the president himself was doing in North Korea, meeting with Kim Jong-un, and he walked away from any deal. What's your take on that?
He looks pretty stupid. The President of the United States gave credibility to a two-bit dictator who likes to kill his own people by going to sit with him and came home with nothing twice. That's not how you do diplomacy. That's not how you do a negotiation.
Well, all due respect, I disagree. I mean, there are plenty of summits where you don't get anything at first, and you sort of lay the groundwork. Reagan and Reykjavik came back, and everyone criticized him for not getting anything. But then, historic things happened eventually. So I think it's too soon to say, nothing happened. We don't know exactly what they were negotiating. I do agree with Hank. I'm a little uncomfortable with the way that the president is treating the leader. But that's also part of diplomacy. That's a little flattery for him is something that you can give away for free if you are trying to extract something from them. But I would like to see him do that with everyone, and including our friends and allies, and not just dictators. But I think that that's something he can easily give away.
Chapin Fay, Hank Scheinkoff.
Thank you.
Always thank you for your insight. Appreciate you coming in. Thank you.
Thanks, Marvin.
That'll do it for our program this week. If you have any comments or would see this broadcast again, log on to our website, pix11.com/newscloseup. I'm Marvin Scott. Thanks so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, everyone.